more than 6 years, and probably, you know, there are working just with me, there are at least between 30 to 40 people, but then there are contributions for at least twice as much people with external. And this is what you do. This is, for instance, something that we did for the hypothetical spreading of a highly pathogenic disease in London during the Olympic Games, just to see what would happen in terms of the spreading. You know, if you, of course, here there was that is work funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, so that you are thinking to something very bad, you know, not something national. Okay, so you see, this is what you do is then to project exactly where the infected people have gone and what is the probability that one place will see, you know, index cases, so the possibility of an outbreak. Well, you say, okay, but this you are entering the what if game, okay? Can you tell me that this is not just SimCity? It's not a video game, okay? Well, yes, for that we have to go back in history for a few minutes, because in 2009, we had a pandemic starting from Mexico. I think you are all old enough to remember that probably was 3-4 years ago now. And basically in Mexico there was a first, this new strain of influenza started to appear in Mexico City. Actually, it has been traced back to another place that is a rural area where there are a lot of pigs farm. And basically from there it spread all over the world. Okay, initially it was a big scare because the mortality was incredibly high, almost 20%. That would have been a major tragedy. Actually, there was issue in which data were communicated from Mexico, so actually the mortality, likely enough, was very low, so the disease was a mild disease, we had a mild pandemic, although there have been all over the world 10,000s of deaths because of that. We always say it was a hoax. It was not a hoax. You know, things worked out, and because also there was a lot of preemptive measures. But you know, what we did is, okay, we had more or less the computational infrastructure in place, and we say, can we do prediction? Because now we are in real time. We don't play the what if game. And why I say prediction? Prediction because for the disease you do more or less what you do for weather forecast. There is a part of the data which are structural data. So these are the data about the population, the mobility, the airlines, etc., etc. These are data that comes from the real world. You don't have any assumption. Then there are a certain number of data that actually you don't have about the disease. But this is, there is what we call the plausible parameterization. We know that those parameters do not change too much for all the influenza strains. So for instance, the number of asymptomatic people could change from 40 to 60%, but not, you know, to 100% or 10%. The probability that you do not travel because of the disease is very well mapped. We all behave in the same way when we have commitments and at the same time we are sick. So, you know, those parameters is like the micro climate parameters that are used in weather forecast model, but of course you cannot consider all the, you know, the little mountains or forests here and there. So you have an effective treatment knowing that more or less things are under control. And then there are a few parameters which are really a problem, because for each strain of the influenza you have a different transmissibility, the probability that if I'm infected, the people listening to me will be infected, and the duration of the disease, for how long you will be sick. And finally, the seasonal effect. You know that during the winter, the epidemic, usually influenza spread much easier. But you know, this is different, depends on each kind of virus. Well, what we need is to say, okay, we know that, now we need to find those parameters, because we need to find those parameters to describe specifically this disease. And what we did is something that is called Monte Carlo likelihood analysis. I don't want to get into the details, but again, computer science and physics teach us a lot. Basically, what you do is to say, let's imagine all the possible value of those parameters. For each point in this complicated space, you start to create a synthetic epidemic in the computer. And then you look with a statistical techniques to the epidemic, to the synthetic realizations that are the best approximation of the first 3 to 4 weeks of the epidemic. Okay, this is the likelihood analysis. And you will see that if you do that, most of the parameters that you use will create epidemics which are completely different. And there is instead a very small part of this parameter space where actually the epidemics is pretty well representing what you get from the first 1 month of data, 2 months of data. Then you single out those parameters, and you use those parameters at that point to launch simulations that will go much more in the future. So we'll go, 6 months into the future, okay? This seems, oh, that's nice, you can do that. Of course, to do that, it means that you have to do millions and millions of global epidemic simulations. Well, to do that is really a problem because actually you need a supercomputer. So we were lucky during that was a crisis, so we had a supercomputer just for us. A moment of a dream comes true for a scientist. Basically, you get the key of a supercomputer, everybody's out, and then you play this on this supercomputer continuously. Okay? And it was also fun because at a certain point it was clear that it was a mild pandemic, so you are also not under too much stress. But the point is that we had to do the things in real time. And just imagine that every time that we do a simulation, we produce 300 megabyte to 1 gigabyte of data. We had to do millions of those. And this is terabyte of data. You can imagine all the computational problems. Also things that comes from the policy making. People ask us to consider immigration from the border, from Mexican border into the United States, to see if the disease could be slowed down by closing the border. Of course, it was not possible. Well, if we do that, just to give you an appeal, one thing. So these were our predictions for the epidemic peaks in the northern hemisphere from the United States, Canada, and then many other countries in Europe, etc., etc. These were predictions. So this is the confidence interval. So that was the 50% confidence interval, 95% confidence interval. We got a result that was very strange. The peak was in November. And we got this 2 months, 3 months in advance. Now, you would expect that the peak is in January, February, when usually you have the seasonal peak of influenza. So what we were saying is, look, the mobility, the initial condition from Mexico, the mobility of people, the seasonality, etc., makes a systemic situation so that in the end, the epidemic will peak in November. If it peaks in November, all the vaccination programs are not basically possible to carry out. So it was a strong message. And of course, we publish the paper, but we communicate to agencies before, and after 2.5 years of data collection, now we can validate this. And in red, you see the actual peak in all those places from the monitoring system from hospitals. So you see that basically the model was able to tell you almost by the week, in more than something like 60 countries or so, when it was expected the maximum activity of the pandemic. Of course, there are errors. There are things like we were not good in France, because in France in October there is I don't know, the school system there is crazy. So there is everybody goes on vacation for 2 weeks in October. And we didn't know that, and of course if you include that in the model, then you get a participation of the peak, because actually the schools and also university, but especially lower level, lower grade schools are the first place for the epidemics. You can imagine in kindergarten, kids do all the things that shouldn't be done to contain the disease. So you see, basically you start to say, well, the system works, And you can create maps of risk. And this is, for instance, is a map of risk that will tell you, this is the epidemic peak week. And here I draw a line after 6 months, because after 6 months you have the vaccine available. And then here I draw a line that is the average value of the number of hospitals, of beds in hospitals for 10,000 individuals in the population. You see, I divide in 4 sectors the world. And you can see who is much more at risk. Of course, Mexico was very at risk because it was the origin country, so the peak was after, probably 1 month of the first detection, 2 months of the first detection. And at the same time, was a quite limited number of hospital beds. While you see that you have, most of the Western world it was in the safe area because of the better health system, but also because the epidemic would have peaked later. Okay, and there were countries at least that was mostly in the South American region, and then of course there were a lot of African countries at risk because of the very poor health system. So you see that you can start to do things that helps policymakers. Just let me give you an appeal, the problem of nonlinearity. I'm telling you since now almost 40 minutes that all these things of epidemics is because of human mobility. So you would say, okay, if I, at the very early stage of the epidemic, I do not allow people to travel, I do travel restriction, the epidemic will slow down a lot. And so we did the numerical exercise and we slow down by 50%, 60%, 70% the global worldwide mobility. Basically, you freeze the world. This goes bankrupt all the airlines in the world, so you cannot do that. It was just an exercise, but then what you get is that you delay the epidemic by 5 days. Nothing. You don't buy anything. So you have a huge pulse on the system, and you get a very small response. This is the complexity. It's non-intuitive. When you see in the numerics, then you can go back to the equations, and after 2 years of work, you can understand why is that. And I don't give you the details, but actually there is a deep mathematical reason for that. There is one problem that I can consider. The world is not as good as it seems, and actually the prediction and everything that we did were very good because actually the epidemic was mine. If the epidemic is very bad and people start to die, you can imagine that you don't go to work, you don't travel, you don't go to do shopping, etc., etc. So the world changed, the behavior changed. So one of the major problems in this area is still the fact that we need models and data to evaluate the feedback of the process and the reaction of people. Because we are not like a hurricane. A hurricane doesn't care if we predict it or not. People, if I tell you that the epidemic will be very bad, will change their behavior. And this is the part where we have to do the most work, is to understand the social behavior, the reaction. But this is also where now we can see light. Why? Because an epidemic is basically the mapping of a contagion process in the geographical space among individuals. But we can use the same metaphor in a completely different space, that is the social space. And we can imagine fear as a contagion process, knowledge diffusion as a contagion process, the emergence of consensus for a political party, for a candidate, for anything like a consensus, a spreading process. And what we need to do is to know the geography of the system. But now the geography of the system is defined by the social space, by our communities, by what we do. And so I want to tell you one thing. We can finally access those spaces. For instance, one thing that we built is a large infrastructure that basically take all the Twitter messages in the world and analyze those messages. Okay? Your conversation, what you say. And if we do that, for instance, we can do simple things. Let me analyze all the messages with GOP, that is classic term for American politics, and see what you think, what people think. And we can do simple network analysis. For instance, you know that on Twitter you can be a follower, you can send an @ message, you draw this network. What is the political conversation, who is following who, and who is addressing message to the other people. And then you draw this network. And this is the network in the United States. Do you understand what it is that? This is the Democratic camp, and the other bubble is the Republican camp. You see, people talk among each other, follows each other, and there are just a few gatekeepers that keeps the communication alive. But basically what you have here is that you have mapped the political social space and how ideas could travel, how memes, concept could travel on this space. Now you can imagine that you can do for many, many other things. You can start to draw those spaces. You can understand what is in these messages, what the people is talking about. here I could tell, for instance, do very targeted advertising campaign to buy books about a certain political, with certain political ideas, and they know who to target with. Okay. Now, really, in the last 3 minutes, since we start to get into this analysis, deep analysis of social system, let me tell you the truth. There is a lot of people that say, okay, now we can do prediction really on what you think and what will happen. What will happen in elections, what will happen for riots, what will happen for economics. Is that true? Can we do that? Well, this is still controversial. There is people with success, people that didn't, was not successful, etc. So I want to show you in the last 2 minutes a game, really, we played a game. So just forgive me, we have been working on epidemics and very somber things for many years. So we decided to find a system that was simple enough to predict by using social indicators. And what we come up is that we didn't want to have any problem with elections like intrinsic bias and even sampling because certain people are not really on Twitter but they vote incumbents, candidates and their history, etc., etc. So we wanted to do something different and we picked up a system that you might know. I don't know if you like singing competition, but what we want is to analyze American Idol. Do you know what it is, all of you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we say is, okay, can we intercept all the Twitter message on American Idol? In this case, the people that are tweeting on American Idol is in the fan base, okay? So they are committed. They are the people that will vote. So if we can really understand what's happening in their messaging, we can probably predict who will go out and who will win this competition. And so we did start to do this work. We identified all the memes and all the hashtags for the competition. And you see, this is a typical signal during the show. These are the 3 candidates of one of the semifinals, Jessica, Philip, and Joshua. You see that I don't know how much you are connoisseur of this TV show, but they were singing 3 times during the night. And you see that there is a spike of messaging every time they sing. I can tell you by the minute, by looking at Twitter, if they are singing or not. Okay? Then things are mixed up and messed up because on the East Coast the show starts at 8, but then on the Central State at 9, and then 10, and then 11, then things becomes mixed up, okay? Well, what we did is to say, okay, let's start to do the prediction, and basically we were always getting who was going out. The probability to do this exercise, basically for all the eliminations, is 1/1000, so it's not just by chance if you want a baseline, okay? And you can really see, you know, we were doing these maps with what was the electoral basis. This is like, you know, the cartogram for elections. So this is, we were assigning states to the various candidates, and we were getting it. Then at the end, what we did decide to do is to post a message saying, okay, this is the system we have in place, this is the results we have. Now we are going to tell you in advance who is going to win in the show, okay, after the last TV things. And here we have a little problem, because we measure all the tweets that we were getting, and we have one candidate, this Jessica, that was much over these other guys. And actually it seemed a little strange to us. And so we get into a more deeper investigation. There is something good about Twitter. We can geolocalize. Where are you tweeting from? And so we looked at those signals and we realized that Jessica was coming from there, the Philippines. And then we say, what the hell is going on? She's from a Philippine family. And the president of Philippines made a major statement in the news of the country saying that they should support, you know, this candidate. Now the problem is that you are not allowed to vote from those countries because just if you are a resident of the United States can vote for the show. So we restricted the analysis to the US, and the candidate that was winning was this Philip guy. Okay? So what we say is, look, if things are correct and people do not find a way to, how to say, to create backdoors into the system by stealing IP addresses or things like that, the American guy is going to win. And actually the American guy won. So you basically, you get the details. Can you understand what kind of details and discussion you can give on predicting a social phenomenon? This is amazing. And I think it's a very good test case. Of course, this is very simple. It's not like political elections. But you know, how many other information we can cross-correlate? And now just let me tell you that this is already, just this simple exercise produce a problem that we have. There are betting agencies, and they were very upset with us because we were telling, you know, the outcome, and of course they have quotes that instead are based on complete different systems. So you are trying basically to beat the news and the betting agencies, but this is now at our grasp, so we can do that. So just let me close. This is the future that we'll have in the next 5 years. We can read your email, people can read your email, your tweets, your credit cards, etc., and we can use all those data for the good, the next epidemic, the next pandemic, understand social phenomena, understand political movements, as well as to do a lot of scary things. So we need to do science, we need to understand what are our limits, we need really to work in this. And this is really an interdisciplinary endeavor. Whatever you will do, from economics to physics, is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the exciting lecture. So we'll have it's open for questions. I'm sure you have some questions. I'll wait for the students.
I'll wait for our colleagues.
Students. Yes.
For like your pandemic model, how do you collect reliable data from like third world?
Okay, from the third world countries, the reliable data for the population are coming from these experiments, which actually maps the human population from satellite images and not from census data. Then they correlate with the census data, so these are pretty reliable. Airline company, long-range movement, there are no problems because this is all indexed anyway by the International Aviation Association. There is problem with commuting patterns. And then is where we use models to simulate the commuting patterns. And where we do not have data, we use a resolution that is larger. So while the resolution in the United States is a resolution for the population of about 10 by 10 kilometers, in African countries could be 200 by 200 kilometers. So you have to be, you know, to use a multi-scale approach. Just let me tell you something, because this is really an effort. You know, the heroes of what we are doing are all the people working in my lab, in other labs. You know, these are young people, PhD students, postdocs. I think mine is working today, but Martin is here. Martin has just arrived and is working on those social modeling. So you know, these are really, you know, the core. I think we need the energy of of the young people to do this work and all these skills that you have. And in many cases, we all guide you not have.
What was your academic trajectory about you?
The academic trajectory is that by education I'm a physicist, and I think this has built in my brain a way to reason about problems. But then, you know, I've been working on condensed matter for about 10 years, and then I did start to work on systems which are in condensed matter, but basically the equation, the mathematics is very similar to epidemics spread. And from there I moved into computer viruses and the internet. So I've been working on modeling the internet system, computer viruses for several years. And so in the last 10 years, I've always been a professor in a computer science department. And now since 5 years, I moved heavily into the biology of contagion processes. And so now I'm also in the department of health here. But so basically, you see, it's a very tortuous trajectory. If I look in retrospect, you know, it's like if every 5 to 7 years I move into a different area. I think this is very, you know, it's very challenging because I've been publishing in physics journal, then in computer science journal, then in medicine journal, and each of these community has its own idiosyncrasies and craziness also. So you have to learn how to write for those journals, how to to talk to and present things to the various communities. It's very, very different. Everything is very different. It's challenging, but it's very fun. Because, at a certain point, you are a physicist, you know how it works. You can do that for your lifetime. But then, you get another game, and you are back as a PhD student. You have to go through textbooks, you have to learn the basic things, and this is very, very fun. It's very stimulating. So, but it's a very strange trajectory. But I think there will be more and more of those trajectories in the future. I think, now if you think about data science, most of the data science people are people who get trained in physics or computer science. They are very good with computational skills, but then they apply those skills usually in the social arena. So you need social science skills. Actually, it's now a large part of the world. And so
many physicists forecasting the stock market for
yeah,
for worse.
That's what that's
so
all.
I think the more and more we will see this kind of, from time to time you can say, I don't want to exaggerate, but it's really like a renaissance moment in which you really need to be open to new ideas, new skills, and abandon the silos compartmentalization of this. Yes.
Did you work with Twitter to get all the information, or did you write like your own programs that kind of just listened for every single tweet? Because that sounds kind of ridiculous.
No, we had to cut a deal with Twitter with them, because basically you can query their API, but these are very strong limits, so you cannot get the signal. So what we have is what they call the garden hose. So basically it's 20% of their signal plus when we go into specific question, then we can mine specific things and get much more than that. And of course you need to cut a deal with them. So we need permission to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. There is one thing. So of course there are all the ethical things. We are not doing anything that is on the single individuals, although we could look at single users, but we don't do that. There is something that is very scary. Think about it. When you sign for Twitter, Gmail, whatever, you're basically saying that your data are there. So what they do, for instance, Twitter, is that they give us the data for research. But of course, those companies are also selling data so that you can do marketing, etc., etc. So the data are available. It's a little bit more difficult to get data from mobile providers, but they too are opening their safe box. So it's now most of the data. But I think it's very urgent that we get some data policy so that for research those data are open. Because otherwise we have an unfair competition. Within Google, they do all the things that we do in academia, but they have an immense amount of data. And you don't want those results to be just confined to the corporate world. You want really that the research, is disseminated, is open, published, openly, etc.
So one of my PhD students just interviewed at Google, so they're
Yeah.
interested
Oh yeah, they get physics and social scientists and everybody. Now, if you happen to be in California, go to Googleplex and see what they're doing. It's really fascinating as well as scary.
Okay, we want to turn to the faculty.
There was there one question.
More questions
Yeah.
from students?
Nope, I didn't.
Oh,
Okay. Next one.
Yeah, again, with the American Idol as well as the example of this from Twitter information, what exactly is the data that you extract from the Twitter? Is it the full message? Is it the name Jessica, to take the last example?
the full message.
The full
We have the
message.
full. We can do
Okay.
whatever you want on the